impossible to discuss Street Fighter 2 without discussing the fighting game genre prior to its release. When many people today think of a fighting game, they think of one set by the format that Street Fighter 2 laid out. However, that game was not made in a vacuum. It was in part a combination of many games that came out before it, and it had different levels of inspiration from all of these. Without the innovations that these titles made and the risk that they took, Street Fighter 2 would not have been reality.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
Warrior from 1972. A
1,
two-player
2,
open sword
3,
fighting game
4,
that
5,
depicted
6,
two knights.
7,
The aim
8,
was simply
9,
to hit
10,
another player's
1,
body with
2,
a sword
3,
in order
4,
to defeat
5,
them.
6,
If you hit
7,
their sword,
8,
they
9,
would push back.
10,
It was a novel concept,
3.
and most games of the era that included fighting would be some form of sword fighting. In the early 80s, this included Swashbuckler and the Bioscope with the Apple II, Sword Fight for the ZX Spectrum, Barbarian, most home computers, and The Great Swordsman in the arcade, to name but a few. What linked all of these titles was that strategy was heavily involved, as only a few hits would normally end the match, so taking time and carefully planning an attack was paramount. Introduced in the mid-1980s would be the karate fighting game. These games could initially be regarded as sports games rather than fighting games, as they took their inspiration
2,
from the sports
3,
craft
4,
tournament
5, 6,
rather than
7,
team
8,
deathmatches.
9, 10,
Released in
1, 2,
1982,
3,
karate
4,
on the
5,
Atari
6,
concept
7,
was one of
8,
their first
9,
attempts
10,
to translate the sport to the gaming world,
4,
but this had a very
1,
limited
2,
reach and
3,
little impact.
4, 5,
Karate
6,
Champ,
7,
released
8,
in arcade
9,
in
10,
1984,
1, 2,
introduced some new
3,
mechanics
4,
that had
5,
become
6,
commonplace
7,
in genres,
8, 9,
holding
10,
back to block, and an early form of movement
5.
action. It was also the first
1,
genre
2,
to receive an
3,
upgraded
4,
version,
5,
player
6,
by player,
7,
which added
8,
a 2
9,
player mode.
10, 1,
Way
2,
to explode
3,
the
4, 5,
Released in
6,
1985
7,
on the
8,
Commodore
9,
64,
10,
standardized many of the aspects of the karate
6.
tournament genre, and it would be heavily copied and cloned by titles such as International Karate and contributed to the karate genre's quick expansion on home computers. These games contributed a lot to the early success of fighting games, notably introducing the concepts of more strategic fighting and of scoring points rather than simply beating up an opponent. Karate was not the only martial arts that had attempts made at conversion. Taekwondo had its own title in black belt for the Commodore 64 in 1984, and there were several Kung Fu-based titles, such as Kung Fu on the ZX Spectrum, and more importantly, Yi Kung Fu. Yi Kung Fu introduced to the genre the idea of outlandishness, and instead of attempting to be a realistic simulator, was based more on Chinese folklore and Hong Kong martial arts movies.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
Sword fighting
7,
started in Kung Fu games.
1, 2,
Not the only
3,
ones from the
4,
fighting game
5,
genre.
6,
There are
7,
plenty
8,
more that
9,
can't be
10,
categorized so
1,
easily
2,
and have
3,
different
4,
levels of
5,
success and
6,
impact.
7, 8,
Galactic
9,
Warriors in
10,
1985 by Konami was a
8,
mecha-based fighting game,
1,
which was
2,
also the
3,
first to feature
4,
multiple
5,
playable
6,
characters
7,
with
8,
completely different
9,
movesets
10,
and stats.
1,
But
2,
it was let
3,
down by all
4,
controls.
5, 6,
Urban
7,
Champion,
8,
released
9,
on the
10,
Famicom the year before, introduced evading with simple blocking, as
9.
well as dizzies. Raikoi Gucci from 1988 upped the ante of digitized sprites and interesting character design, while Shanghai Kid from 1985 introduced the combo system for the first time through its rush mechanic. Typhoon Gal in that same year was the first fighting game to feature a female character, and Street Smart by SNK in 1989 introduced the concept of using normal moves as part of a combo rather than a different system. Finally, you have Pit Fighter in 1990, probably the most famous pre-Street Fighter 2 fighting game, managed to make waves thanks to its flashy cabinet and advertising despite its negligible quality, and Violence Fight, released in 1991, featured huge sprites and 80s style charm. This is by no means a comprehensive look at all of the fighting games released for Street Fighter 2, but it's a good overview. Together, all these different games added something different to the recipe. The simulation aspects of the karate games, the strategic parts of the sword fighting, and the characters and style of the Kung Fu games were all right to have the best parts of these cherry-picked and put into something new. The games I chose to illustrate the fighting game genre prior to Street Fighter 2 were just a taste. There were plenty more, and I didn't discuss other types of games which contribute to the genre, such as
1,
boxing,
2,
beating
3,
up, and
4,
wrestling
5, 6,
The idea
7,
is
8,
to give a good
9,
overview
10,
of the
1, 2,
innovations
3,
and the general
4,
direction
5,
that the
6,
genre was
7,
heading in,
8,
give a
9,
point of
10,
comparison to
1.
what came later. It was
10,
a time of experimentation.
1,
We
2,
don't know
3,
what the winning
4,
formula
5,
would be.
6, 7, 8,
Before we move on to
9,
Street Fighter
10,
2, though,
1,
we need
2,
to talk
3,
about Street
4,
Fighter 1.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Today,
9,
many
10,
people
1,
regard Street
2,
Fighter 1 as an odd relic of the past, a strange and funky
8,
fighter
9,
that doesn't
10,
really fit into the series. This attitude does the game a disservice.
12.
As whilst that perspective may be possible today looking back, at the time it wasn't quite the case. Street Fighter 1 was released with an interesting button layout, two huge pressure-sensitive pads. The harder they were hit, the stronger the moves would be. This design was odd, and it didn't work very well in execution. Players often ended up just smashing the buttons and hurting their hands, and it made the controls very imprecise. Eventually, they replaced the pads with a 6-button layout, but by then it was too late and the hype had passed. The game sold averagely, around 2,000 or 3,000 units, and it was averagely well received by those that played it. After the release of Street Fighter 1, Capcom USA wanted a sequel because the game's reception had improved once the control scheme had changed, and they felt a sequel could be a real sales success. Yoshiki Okamoto went to America to do some market research and saw side-scrolling games like Double Dragon performing well, so they wanted to make something similar. In line with Capcom USA's suggestion, they'd make a game like that and call it Street Fighter 89. However, at the convention, they realised that the Street Fighter name was not a particularly great selling point, so instead they changed it to Final Fight. The game was a hit, and they now felt it was the right time to make a true sequel to Street Fighter, using the knowledge they learned from Final Fight. When the management approached game designer Akira Nishitani with plans for a sequel to Street Fighter, he was extremely enthusiastic. He was flush with ideas.
14.
A 2-monitor cabinet for players to fight head-to-head, a series of network cabinets for a 10-player battle royale, a stage set in a sand-swept desert, on the top of a tower in which the loser fell to their death, perhaps underwater stages with limited air supply,
15.
and so on and so on. The management rejected his ideas, as they wanted something much more straightforward, much to his disdain. One of the first concepts of the game was that it was to take place on an abandoned island that had been purchased to host a huge fighting tournament. This map on screen now was shown at one of the very first meetings on the project in 1988. It was around this point that they decided that although the game was going to be a sequel to Street Fighter, it would need to be something revolutionary. They set themselves the task of creating a new genre, something that Yoshiki Okamoto referred to in 1991 as competitive fighting. With the challenge of taking on a new genre, Okamoto stated that it made them free of all their previous shortcomings and dissatisfactions, free to make what he described as the greatest game ever. Nishitani later described some of his dissatisfactions with previous entries in the fighting game genre. He felt that in most of them, the hitboxes didn't make sense, and were created in such a way that was convenient for the game engine, but frustrating for the player. Separately, he felt that attack input timing was delayed or lazy in other games. They started from a point of exploring what was negative in other fighters and action games, methodically going through each aspect which wasn't good and thinking about how they could fix it and do it better. He stated that some of his favourites in arcade had been Karate Champ, Double Dragon and Hippodrome, but by the time the original Street Fighter came out, the genre had become pretty tired and uninteresting.
16.
He stated that essentially the only rules was that it had to be a sequel to Street Fighter and that it had to jump and fight against one opponent. They decided early on that they would create a system in which everyone could input their ideas, from the pixel art,
17.
the character designers and programmers, even to the musicians. It was to be a truly team-focused affair.
18.
One of the most fundamental aspects of the series' success is down to its characters. They set the template for which many future fighting games would attempt to emulate and set the definition to which all other characters in the genre would be compared. The importance of the character design to the game's success cannot be underestimated. It put each character and their distinct look and fighting style front and centre. This was a contrast to many previous games in the genre, which typically featured unremarkable or generic characters, but it was so effective that almost all future games in the genre would become character-focused fairs. The development team was set up in an unusual way, with approximately half of the entire team being art staff, a very high percentage, but it was clear that art direction was of utmost importance. This meant that around 20 artists ended up working under Akira Yasuda on the design of the game. In a 1991 interview, planner Akira Nishitani explained his own involvement with Street Fighter 2. As I mentioned previously, Nishitani was originally quite down about making the game because management rejected many of his outlandish ideas. This changed quite quickly. Nishitani felt passionate about the project, and he decided to show them what he could do within the limits that they had set. He set himself a pledge to make a game that was so good it made the original Street Fighter look like a knockoff. Nishitani knew from the start that he wanted to include 8 player characters and 4 bosses. For many of them, their nationality was decided first, and the character design grew from there. During development, the characters are called Ryu, Ken, Suzuki, Beast, Soldier, Chinese Girl,
I'm not counting.
Indo, Tyson, Spanish Ninja, Sagat, and Washizaki. All of the characters in the game were signed off between Akira Yasuda, Akira Nishitani, and another developer. The character design process went as follows.
Not counting that one.
First, they created a rough sketch of each character.
Sorry, I've been losing count.
They decided on each character's movements and animations. Then they came up with the moves and special techniques.
18, right?
Then they put it all together and played around with the characters, deciding on the balance. How they would jump, how quick they would be, and how they interacted with other characters. Well, let's take a look at each of the Wild Warriors in a little bit more detail, as well as the four boss characters. Zangief, designed by Iko Nakayama, was originally envisioned as a Russian wrestler that hates communism. He became a street fighter for money, being kicked out of pro wrestling
19.
for ignoring the rules and permanently disabling all of his opponents. Nakayama was a huge fan of pro wrestling, so this was his dream character to design. Zangief's focus on wrestling meant that he became a character whose moveset was focused on grappling, and as such, he was much stronger and slower than other characters. His final portrayal focused on his aim to prove Russia's superiority over other nations' fighters. Bulldog, later renamed in the West as Vega, was originally pictured as a crusader-like figure, a combination of a ninja and matador. The religious imagery was later abandoned to concern around Western sensibilities. His concept came about because Nishitani wanted a ninja character, but he already had a karate and a sumo character in Japan, so he decided instead to apply the concept to the Spanish character, hence the unusual combination of matador and ninja. This design was completed just 2 months prior to the game being released by Mitsuho Kageyama. A starting point was from the manga Fist of the North Star, the character known as the Faceless Azura. They ended up taking elements from the Faceless Azura, as well as the original Crusader Ninja concepts, being combined into the large, muscular, yet slender fighter he ended up being. He is depicted as a former noble, combining bullfighting with ninjutsu, but wearing a mask to protect his looks. Chun-Li changed heavily during development. Originally depicted as a somewhat stereotypical cutesy Chinese girl, she ended up to be a strong, gallant Interpol officer. Akira Yasuda was in charge of designing Chun-Li, but he ran into some problems. During development, he was promoted to section chief, which meant he didn't have as much time as he would have liked to work on her design, as well as all of his other commitments at Capcom. He ended up having to do the majority of her design in just 5 weeks. He started by creating her specific moves and using animations for her normal attacks and other characters. He adapted animation patterns that had already been created to Chun-Li's design, which was repetitive and tedious, but he had to do it so that other people's work would not be wasted. His original idea for her design was to make a character that resembled Tao from the Gen Tyson animated movie. He thought that this original design ended up lacking visual impact and personality, being a little too generic. He made a lot of frantic changes to the pixel art to give her more character, such as giving her bare legs and her bodycon dress. He thought that she looked more like a female pro wrestler than a kung fu fighter in this way, but she ended up being much more popular because of it. Some of her design was done for technical reasons. The area around her legs was dark, so he made her boobs white. Her hair buns wouldn't stand out unless they was white. The same goes with her spiked gauntlets in order to make her hand stand out visually. Chun-Li became one of the series' most popular characters. Ryu and Ken's basic design already existed thanks to Street Fighter 1, and they were described as being the standard characters. The goal was to make them the baseline, so they can make the other characters around them strange, but the game would still have a grounding in some sense of reality. This was in part because their moves are simple to learn, and they're the easiest characters for new starters to pick up, so they in turn become the most popular. Eve Honda was designed by Eri Nakamura, also known as Eri-san. She was very new to Capcom at the time, and given the task of designing a character originally titled Eve Suzuki. The rough draft already existed for the sumo wrestler character, and it was up to her to flesh out the design. Originally, he looked like a basic sumo character, but he was given kabuki-style makeup and more exaggerated features. The reason for this is that Nakamura thought street fighters would conceal their identities in battle, and a Japanese character may disguise himself by using such makeup. He was also given a new kata to make him look more distinctive, rather than wearing a sumo belt. His story in the game is that he was the greatest sumo wrestler of all time and wanted to prove sumo's worth amongst the world's martial arts. His stage, sumo wrestling ring in a bathhouse, came about because Nishitani simply liked the combination when he saw it, and has since become one of the most iconic stages in the game. Some of the character's features came about because the team thought it was funny. Blanca started out with normal skin colour, but when flipping through the colour palette, it became green. The team found it funny and decided to keep it that way. He was always depicted to be a beast-like character because the team thought it would be dull if everyone was a regular human, but the green skin and orange hair gave him a far more feral look than perhaps was originally intended. His original backstory is that he was a regular boy who was involved in a plane crash in the Amazon rainforest, exposed to electric eels, triggered his mutation to Blanca. Blanca became a fan favourite, in part because he marked a serious diversion from the more realistic fighting games like Transformers. Guile was a pilot and commander in the US Air Force, and was designed as a character that would appeal to American audiences. Like many of the other characters in the game, He was designed as what foreigners may think someone from a particular country would be like, hence why his design is so over the top. He was given blonde hair, blue eyes, chiseled jaw, and an impossible duck-top haircut, and did indeed end up as one of the most popular characters in the West. Dawson was another example of a character that was changed due to the team finding it funny. They originally had a rule that punches couldn't extend further than 128 pixels, but as they pushed it further and further, it started looking funny how far his arms came out, so they extended it even more. Dawson also got the short end of the stick when it came to walking animations. This was reduced to 4 frames rather than 6 frames like the other characters in order to save on memory. His design changed a lot over the course of the development. Originally depicted as a quasi-Hindu deity, he later changed to a more monk-like appearance, in part inspired by Osamu Tezuka's manga Buddha. His moves came a lot from trial and error and various anime influences, becoming a character that ended up having very few restrictions on what he could do. M. Bison, later renamed in the West as Bulldog, was heavily based on American boxer Mike Tyson. He was also a character who was in the original Street Fighter. Although these are technically different characters in the series canon, they're virtually identical. He's unique amongst the game's cast in that he virtually never uses his feet. Sagat was the final boss of the original Street Fighter, who called the first tournament in order to show his superiority over other martial artists. After being defeated in that tournament, he ended up becoming part of Shadow League and was the penultimate boss in Street Fighter 2. Sagat was one of the tallest characters in the game, fighting in a Muay Thai style with a huge scar on his chest, which he received from Ryu as he lost in the first World Warrior tournament. Vega, only named in the West as M. Bison, was designed by Iko Nakayama and was heavily based on manga character General Washizaki from Rikyo, with influences from Yasunori Kato, villain of the Taito Monogatari franchise. His design was so based on these characters, the late games made efforts to move him away from this, changing how his face looks and making him much bulkier. As he was the final boss, it was expected that many people would not see him, so it wasn't as important to make him unique as it was to the playable characters. He is depicted as a would-be dictator running the shadowy Shadow League organisation with a mysterious past, psycho powers. Many hands went into the development of Street Fighter 2. They often described as a joint effort between Akira Yasuda and Akira Nishitani. Yasuda described Nishitani as being like a god at Capcom, a commanding and confident leader, and trying simply to let each department flesh out the ideas themselves. Nishitani later stated that they started from a point of wanting to take the experience they made during the development of Final Fight and use it to modernise the original Street Fighter. One of the driving forces during the development was whether or not something felt good. They put priority on playtesting and experience, rather than getting caught up in theories or hard logic. An example of this in action was the fact that the player can jump further backwards than they can forwards. It makes no sense from a logical point of view, it simply felt right when it was tested. Nishitani said that this particular idea was lifted from Final Fight, an example of how they listed experience from that project. Other ideas came from trial and error. They wanted to assign more purpose to each action, so that the jumping attacks should be blockable when standing, and sweeps should only be blockable by crouching. Then to make it more fun, they added attacks that could not be blocked by crouching, known as mids, effectively putting together the building blocks for modern fighting games, simply because it felt right. Nishitani stated in an interview in 2017 that because they had previously decided the game was a new genre, they had nothing to compare it to when they were developing the game, so they felt free to reinvent the rules from the ground up. One of the most important parts of fighting games is balance. It wasn't a major concern in many of Street Fighter 2's predecessors, because in those games, most of the characters were essentially the same. In Street Fighter 2, though, it took up a lot of development time. Akira Nishitani made a crucial decision during the development, which fundamentally broke Street Fighter 2 away from almost all its arcade forefathers. He decided that as the opponents also play and control the characters, it wouldn't feel right if they had a different moveset when the computer controls them. Therefore, in order to have the same moveset, they had to create a balanced and flexible AI that wasn't based simply on spamming a few powerful moves. He created a new type of AI system that was a big risk, as if it didn't work, much of the game simply wouldn't work. Luckily, the system panned out, and with a lot of playtesting, they made it work. The one difficulty that AI had was responding to different player strategies. The more control they gave the player, the more the AI needed to respond to. Nishitani stated that AI has the most trouble with dulcing. His unique moves meant that the computer struggled to figure out a way to respond. Dulcing could originally perform his moves in reverse too, which confused the AI so much that these moves had to be removed completely from the game. The first prototype versions of the game had mixed results. It was too easy, and players could last a long time on a single credit. It was at the same time too difficult to pull off moves, and players could not get used to the controls. There was also a massive amount of bugs and glitches. The screen would freeze, characters would fly all over the place, the computer opponent would simply stop moving, and so on and so on. Nishitani explained that this happened because of the complexity of checking everything. He said that there are 10 possible opponents, all throwing hitboxes and AI, and a number of different possible combinations of attacks, combos, and special moves,
37.
meaning there was a lot of possible places for errors and glitches to occur. As with the AI, they solved this by constant playtesting over and over again, so they'd ironed out as much as they possibly could. Nishitani stated that they'd often use strangers to play the game, as a brand new person began to cover things that nobody else had. The balance did not end up perfect, with certain strategies existing that were fairly overpowered, but they managed to do incredibly well to get to a point that most people would never notice. The idea of hardcore fighting game fans did not exist at the time, so they was not overly concerned if there was any minor defects in the balance. There were also some features in the game which have been mistaken to be glitches or bugs, but were actually intended. One famous example is that there is a 1 in 256 chance that a regular attack will cause a special move to happen. Nishitani explained that the reason for this was so that people who did not know the special moves existed could still see them in action, and perhaps search for a way to do them themselves. There was also a small chance of an auto block, adding a bit of luck into the equation. Another is the combo system. It was always intended for there to be a way to have combos in the games, but the way it occurred was slightly unintended. Nishitani spent a lot of time analysing why the special moves were not fun to pull off in the original Street Fighter, and realised a lot of it came down to the input. They realised that by giving the player more leeway to input the move in terms of timing, and being able to input the move at the same time that animation was still in effect for a previous move, it would be easier for players to grasp. The side effect of this is that players can then combine moves into combos and pull off all sorts of strings of attacks. This added a new dimension to the gameplay, and was the point at which they realised they had created something pretty special. Despite the apparent equity between player and computer, the AI opponent did occasionally have advantages that the player did not. This includes being able to perform moves in fewer frames, able to perform moves without moving in the right direction, being dizzy for less time, able to cancel and block it at times, which should be impossible, and more. There is an excellent video that goes into this in detail by Des, who's linked in the description. The final 2 weeks of the game's development were incredibly hectic. Most of the team was pulling all-nighters in an endless repetition of fine-tuning, bug-checking and bug-fixing, retesting and so on. This involved a lot of work from developer Noritaka Inuyasui, who specialised in revising games that were almost complete. Yasuda stated in an interview that many of the team did not mind the work schedule, and they felt as if they was making history. 3 days before the deadline, they found a huge mistake. They had incorrectly spelled warrior in the game's sprite work, using an E instead of an O. There was no time to change the sprite work, so Nishitani had to layer over several other sprites in order to correct the mistake. Despite their best efforts, they did not catch all of the bugs. Ken ended up being slightly stronger than Ryu, because he does not take more damage after Shoryuken. Blanca could take massive damage from a Hadouken when he was doing his rolling attack, and so on. Many of these bugs came to be regarded more as character attributes, but the team themselves hated it whenever a new bug or glitch was found. One day before the deadline, they realised that all the changes they had made to fix bugs had made Guile far too powerful, with his flash kick letting him land further back than he started. They changed it at the very last minute, with the final version being completed at 7 AM, February 14, 1991. Nishitani thanked everyone on the team, cried, and fell asleep under his desk. Street Fighter 2 used an almost unheard of 48 megabit memory capacity, which was very expensive, but they felt necessary to create a game of the quality they wanted. It meant that for Capcom to recoup the costs, it had to be a smash hit. Despite the large memory size, it was not all plain sailing. The ambition of the game meant that this memory was quickly filled up, some features had to be cut. Originally, this process was entrances with entrance animation, but these were cut for space, apart from small remnants of Vega. It was a scramble for memory, with everyone making a claim for why their particular sprite or feature should make the cut, while someone else didn't. One technique they used to help plan memory was to create a physical memory map and map out nothing's wrong, so they could tell exactly how much they needed. Using the 3PS1 system that they had been using for a few years at that point, the team knew how they could get the most out of the hardware they had to hand. Some examples of features which didn't make the cut and had to be taken out with memory and time constraints include adding weak points, depending on whether you hit an opponent in the head, body or leg, even more detailed AI, which responded differently depending on the player character, opponents taking more damage than normal when busy, special knockout animations, and more. The game also did not let you fight against the character you were. This was because if 2 of the larger characters were on screen at the same time, the system could not deal with it. It was not only gameplay features that got cut, there were also special moves, which had to be taken out or abandoned from the build in the first place. Chun Li originally had a backflip attack, which was taken out because it was too overpowered. Blanca could go straight from a rolling attack into a headbutt with no loss of momentum, but this was too strong too. Zangief's headbutt was supposed to be part of a combination which would throw an opponent straight into the air and then headbutt them on the way down. But this too was removed. Street Fighter 2, some of the most memorable music of any video game, and that's all down to one person, Yoko Shimomura. Shimomura explained that her general approach to game music depended on whether or not it was an arcade game or a console game. Arcade games could have slightly quirkier music, as they would only be heard in short bursts, whereas console games would be heard over a longer period, continuing to be easier in years. It ended up being part of the Street Fighter 2 series by chance. This happened to be the composer of Capcom that was the most free at the time of the music being created. The regular method of music creation at Capcom was that the game developers would go to a music designer and take some screenshots and designs and tell them what they wanted, what kind of sound and feeling they should have. With Street Fighter 2, however, she was simply told that each character should have a theme. When looking through the designs of the stages of characters, she noticed that they were not really true to their country origin, instead being more of a geisha or kabuki in Japan, a mysterious, distorted view of a foreigner. She took this idea into the theme song, making music which the feeling of the country, rather than what music from that country actually sounded like. She described this as making world music with a comedy taste. She also suggested a defining feature of the game, that when a character was badly beaten, the music would speed up and become more desperate. An example of how she came up with the music is Blanca's theme. She came up with the rhythm quite quickly, but could not figure out the melody. As it was getting late in development, she became anxious about whether or not she could finish in time. One morning, on the train into work, we saw a yellow-green paper bag sitting on the luggage shelf. As she stared at this, she thought of Blanca's colour design, and suddenly the melody popped into her head. The theme was unusual, as the rhythm is in a major key, but the melody is in a minor key. People that studied music felt that if you heard an A natural and an A flat at the same time, it should be fixed, but many of the other composers at Capcom felt it should have been changed. However, the strange broken feeling was what gave the theme its charm. Street Fighter 2 also offered Shimomura the opportunity to compose the music on a circuit sound system through a PC, so she could adjust it on the fly. She would compose the music data, put it onto the FM software, and adjust it accordingly. The FM sound chip allowed her up to 255 sounds, so she could save plenty of unique and worldly sounds, and let her create a unique feeling of each country that she was trying to achieve. Shimomura described the music of Street Fighter 2 as her baby, and was one of her favourite ever projects to work on. Shimomura composed the vast majority of the game's music and sound, but additional work done by Isao Abe, who created Sagat's theme and some of the jingles, such as Here Comes a New Challenger and Round Start. The first location tests of the game did not go particularly well. They was predicting the cabinet would get played around 300 times a day, it was only played around 98 times a day. The reason for this was that Japanese players just wouldn't fight against other strangers. Capcom spent a lot on advertising to convey that this was a multiplayer game, and a magazine called Gamist wrote about it a lot, specifically referring to it as battle play. This eventually worked, and as people started to play together, the game blew up. It was a different story in the West. It was an instant hit, and people wanted it straight away, with the idea of playing against strangers being more accepted culturally. Capcom was extremely confident in Street Fighter 2, so according to the initial run of 70,000 PCBs, a huge amount at that time, that meant the game had to be a smash hit if Capcom was to stand any chance of recouping that investment. To say the game was a smash hit was an understatement. It was beyond a smash hit. It was a global gaming phenomenon, revitalising the arcade scene both in Japan and abroad. Street Fighter 2 was designed in such a way that it always brought in money. The focus on multiplayer meant that even if one player dominated, the other player could put money on the team. This gave it a distinct advantage over single-player games, which could be played for much longer on a single point by a single player. Because the players are being beaten by another player, they are often not as frustrated with defeat, and there was a rare example of a game that made both the player and arcade owners happy. Akira Nishitani stated that with the release of Street Fighter 2, they felt as if they had unleashed the fighting instinct within human beings. He noted the cultural differences between Japan and the West. In Japan, it was a little rarer to play together, whereas in the West, it was almost entirely multiplayer, often between strangers. He pondered that it could be that Westerners are more warlike, and noted that their strategy was often straight-out attack, rather than the more defensive and cautious style we found back in Japan. He made his assumptions soon after the game had released, but even then he sensed that things were changing in Japan. He noticed that some arcades started setting up versus tournaments, with strangers playing together and they're becoming more normal. It made him extremely happy to see. Many of the game's designers have stories of where they noticed the game's success. Yoko Shimomura found that on a trip to Spain, she went to a restaurant and all the local kids were coming to play Street Fighter 2, not buying any food or drink. She felt proud when they started using some of the sumo phrases from the game. Overseas, the game underwent a few changes. The first were some of the characters' names. M. Bison was renamed Bullrog because Capcom USA felt it was too close to Mike Tyson and they was worried about potential legal issues. They then replaced Bullrog with Vega because they felt it sounded better than M. Bison. It wasn't a perfect solution. They was unable to replace the graphics, so instead had to make do with a switch around. However, in an interview with Polygon, Tom Shiraiwa speculates that this was actually done because the US team liked to feel as if they had a role in the development, so always wanted to make some kind of change. And the Japanese team simply assumed they was experts in their region and didn't push back. An unexpected consequence of Street Fighter II's success was the prevalence of bootlegged and counterfeit versions of the game. It was such a huge problem that they created a legal function in-house just to attempt to deal with it. For example, Capcom officially sold no copies of Street Fighter II Machine in Mexico, yet there existed around 200,000 copies of the game in Mexico. Capcom went in hard at many of the originators of the pirate copies in Taiwan, as well as any arcade operator that was found to be using a counterfeit board. This market existed simply because the demand for the game was so high that Capcom couldn't keep up. They managed to stem the tide somewhat, but ultimately it was out of their control. Some of these bootlegs, such as Street Fighter Rainbow, made changes to the game's code and became urban legends in their own right, furthering the game's defeat.
2, 3.
The smash hit success of Street Fighter II meant it was inevitable that they'd do more of the game. Instead of creating a true sequel, they instead settled on iteration. Street Fighter II Champion Edition fixed many of the bugs and glitches from the original release and let the player fight as the four kings. Street Fighter II Turbo increased the speed of the game, partially in an effort to battle against the bootleg versions of the game, which was doing that already. At this point, the game received its first console port onto the Super Nintendo originally, which became a major selling point of the system. Later on, ports were made to other consoles, such as the Mega Drive. The console port sold extremely well, and this confirmed it that the game would sell well no matter what platform it was on, and more ports and versions of the game followed. The success of Street Fighter II and its variants cemented Capcom as a fighting game powerhouse. They created other popular franchises, such as the Darkstalkers series, and even moved into crossover games in the future, featuring characters from Street Fighter and Marvel. They made more sequels to Street Fighter, both in the 2D and 3D realms, and it spawned a legion of games that copied the style, some so closely that Capcom even decided to sue in the case of Fighter's history. Street Fighter II spawned the fighting game that we know today, created a legend, and saved the arcade. It's a story of how a passionate group of developers created a game that was fundamentally fun to play, teaching all the old norms and rules that came before it, and despite some setbacks, created a phenomenon. Thanks for watching this making of, making it all the way to this part of the video. Now I know most people just click away at this part, but I'd be really appreciative if you do hang around for a second whilst I plug myself. If you like the video, I'd be really honoured if you decided to subscribe. If you do, please consider clicking the bell so you get notified when I release a new video. I know a lot of people say this, but on my last video, I've nearly 2,000 subscribers, just 11 people got a notification telling them that I had a new video. YouTube's system is so broken, unfortunately, unless you click the bell, it's likely you just never see them. Next up, if you want to support the content, you can join my channel as a patron, which gives you a cool little emoji next to your name in the comments, as well as access to a members area in my Discord. I'm also planning to do some channel member only content in the future too. As I said, I do have a Discord where I can talk about everything games and geekery. There'll be a link in the description. I have a Twitter if you're into that, and finally, all the sources I've used for this video will be in the description. Thanks for watching.
I found a new AI tool and I am obsessed. It's completely open source and I use it every day. It's called Fabric. Daniel, tell me what Fabric is.
So basically the goal is to augment humans with AI. So it's all about reducing that friction to be able to use AI for your problems.
That's Daniel Meisler, the creator of reducing friction so you can use AI to solve your problems. That's the real purpose of technology and AI. And that's what this project Fabric is helping us do. I legit use this every day, and I think you might too. So in this video, we're going to break down what Fabric is, and I'll show you how to set this up so you can start using it right now. And later in this video, I'll show you how to use Fabric to access your local AI system. Terry, how do I go? With a sponsor in this video, explain to me. Let's talk more about that.
Okay, you ask you something absolutely crazy?
Yes, Daniel, I do. Get your copy ready. Let's do this. Now, before we dive too deep, I want to give you a framework for what using Fabric is kind of like. Like, what's the use? What would I use this for? This, you're going to watch this. Let's say I have a YouTube video. This is a 2-hour interview that maybe I don't have time to watch. And on my command line, I use the tool white --transfer and paste a link. I'm just going to grab the transfer that I use video. By the way, this is a tool that's built and it's a fabric. That alone makes this thing amazing. And then I'll type that over into that 2-hour YouTube video. There we go. Within moments, I'm told about David Bumble and everything we discuss in this video. The ideas, insights, quotes, like this one. Man, who said that? Sorry. So within a few moments, I took a 2-hour YouTube interview and extracted all the wisdom from sabotaging. That's crazy, right? So what's happening? What is fabric doing? Let's break that down. First, we start off with some kind of in this case, the YouTube transcripts really could be anything. Fabric or science, in this case, our YouTube transcripts.
21.
It could be models from OpenAI, Anthropic, or even local models with Olami.
Thank you.
You can show you how to access a local server from anywhere using Burpees. Now, looking at command, it's not just sending the